Okay, welcome back. So hope all of you already watched the video or at least read the PowerPoint slides, and you have some idea about the formula that you need to know for chapter 7. Now we will practice couple of problems, chapter and problems. First you need to do E721A, and it's from your textbook, page number 420. Since some of you mentioned that you prefer this screen capture instead of classroom recording, so I'm going to record this solving. This chapter is pretty straightforward. You just need to know the formula I already mentioned. The formulas already are on your PowerPoint slides, and it's also on your blackboard. So you need to know the formula, this formula for solving the problems here in chapter 7. So let's try to do E721A, and once you are done with your practice, don't forget to do your homework. So read the problem with me. Socks Unlimited produces sports socks. The company has fixed expenses of $85,000 and variable expenses of $1.20 per package. Each package sells for $2. So this is the information, and requirement number 1 says you need to compute the contribution margin per package. Remember, per package means per unit, and you need to calculate the contribution margin ratio. And then we will calculate break-even points in terms of units and dollar sales. We will also calculate the target unit and dollar sales to earn a certain profit or operating income. That means here you need to use the formula in the first two boxes. So let's start. E721A. First question, compute the contribution margin per package. So you know the idea of contribution margin is same what you did in chapter 6 when you did your contribution margin income statement. Contribution margin is nothing, just the difference between your sales price and variable expenses. And it says to calculate the contribution margin per package or per unit. So we're gonna use the information for per unit or per package. So contribution margin, I can write it down, contribution margin per unit means what? It's your sales price per unit minus your variable expense per unit. Per unit. So now you know everything is given here. Per unit means per package, right? So you see here your sales price per package is $2 and your variable expense is $1.20. That means the difference, which is 80 cents, is your contribution margin per unit. Isn't it very simple? So that means I will just plug in the numbers. Our sales price per unit is $2 and our variable expense per unit, which is given here, $1.20. So the contribution margin per unit is very simple. It's 80 cents. It also says calculate the contribution margin ratio. Remember, contribution margin ratio is nothing, just the expression of contribution margin in terms of sales. And if you remember from your formula sheet, either you could use per unit information or you could use your total amount information. That means total amount of contribution margin or total sales revenue. Since in this problem we have per unit or per package information, so we're gonna calculate the contribution margin ratio by using per units information. So contribution margin ratio I will just copy and paste the formula to save our time. Contribution margin ratio is contribution margin per unit over sales price per unit. But you need to remember the formula, especially for your exam when no formula sheets will be provided, then you really need to remember the formula. So contribution margin ratio, which you know it's given here, it's contribution margin per unit divided by sales price per unit, and you just calculated this is your contribution margin per unit, right? And you know from your problem your sales price per unit is $2. So this is very simple. Our contribution margin per unit, which is our numerator at the bottom part, it's 80 cents over sales price per unit, which we already know. You can also see it from here or from your problem. Each package sells for $2. That means sales price per unit is $2. So if you do this little math, you will find that contribution margin ratio is 0.4, or you can also call it 40%. That means if you make $100 sales, your contribution margin will be $40. So we just did our requirement number 1, where we calculated our contribution margin per package and the contribution margin ratio. Now we will do requirement number 2. So here we're gonna calculate our break-even point, and we will calculate break-even point in units and in dollars. So I'll just highlight our results here. So now to calculate break-even points, which could be either in unit or in dollar, you need to know the formulas. So we will take a look at our second box where you know the formula. So first, if you want to calculate your break-even in unit, this is the unit formula. Let's copy and paste the formula, but you have to remember the formula. Because during the exam, I'll not give you the formula. Okay, so now break-even units, if you want to calculate the break-even in terms of units, this is the formula: fixed expense plus operating income, which will be your numerator at the bottom part, and you have to divide it by contribution margin per unit. So that means break-even sales in units, our numerator or the top part will be fixed expenses plus operating income, and your bottom or the bottom part or denominator will be contribution margin per unit. So it's given here, fixed expense is $85,000. Operating income, you could remember that at break even our operating income is 0, so we will plug in 0 here. And now you need to check what is your contribution margin per unit. So if you go up, we actually calculated it. Our contribution margin per unit is 80 cents. So we will take this one, 80 cents, which is our contribution margin per unit. And we will take fixed expenses, which is given here, $85,000, and we know operating income at break-even is 0. So let's plug in the numbers. So our fixed expense, I'm plugging fixed expense, which is $85,000. At break-even, our operating income is 0, so I'm plugging 0. This is our top part or the numerator over contribution margin per unit. Can anyone remember what was your contribution margin per unit? Yes, you should remember that, or you can check it. I guess it's 80 cents. We got it here, so I am gonna divide it by 80 cents. One tip to remember: if you want to calculate break-even in units, your numerator will be contribution margin per unit. If you want to calculate break-even in dollar value, your sorry, your denominator, the bottom part will be contribution margin ratio. So I just plug in these numbers. Operating income at break even is 0, and if you do the math, I guess you will find it's 106,250. Right, yeah, I just did it. You also please check it with your calculator. 85,000 divided by 0.8. Right, that means these are the units. So if the company sells 106,250 units, then they will reach at their break even. Now we're gonna do the same break even things, but now our last part of requirement 2 says to calculate break even in dollars. Remember, it's the same formula, but instead of using contribution margin per unit, we gonna use contribution margin ratio. You can take a quick look. This is our break even sales in terms of dollar value. So I can copy the formula for you. That's the formula. And now we will plug in the numbers. So the top part is same. Fixed expense is $85,000 again at break even. Your operating income is 0. But instead of using contribution margin per unit, we're gonna use contribution margin ratio. And if you go back, we calculated that contribution margin ratio is 0.4. So let's plug in the numbers. We will calculate break-even sales in dollar value. So again, numerator at the top part is same, $85,000, which is our fixed cost at break-even. Our operating income is 0, and we're gonna use our contribution margin ratio, which we just calculated here, 0.4. Or 40%. 40% means 0.4. Now if you do the math, please take your calculator. 85,000 divided by 0.4. And remember, this is in terms of dollar value, so don't forget to write down the dollar sign. And I have my calculator. What I got, it's 212,212,500. That means if your sales is 212,500, then you will reach your contribution margin. Now the third requirement is we will find the number of packages socks, or the units that the company needs to Socks Unlimited needs to sell to earn $22,000 operating income. So again, we're gonna calculate our certain number of units that the company needs to sell to earn a target operating income. Right, so we will use the same formula what we used here, sales in units, but now it's not for the break even, it's for a certain target profit, and we know the certain target profit we want to earn $22,000 profit. So instead of plugging in 0, we will write down 22,000 as our operating income. So let's do requirement number 3. It's actually 3. Don't worry. Now we will figure it out. Sales in units to earn target profit or target operating income. And it's actually the same formula, right? Remember, it's unit, so we want to calculate it in units. So we will take the unit formula, which is here. So I'm just copying and pasting the formula. Sales in unit for a certain target profit. What we need to do, we need to plug in the numbers, right? So sales in units will be your fixed expense, which you already know. We did it few times. I can show you the problem. Again, fixed expense is $85,000. $85,000 And your operating income, remember this time it's not zero. We are not talking about the break even. We are talking certain operating income. Our target operating income is $22,000. So that is our target operating income. So for operating income, I will plug in $22,000. And the next part is very simple. Our contribution margin per unit, which I believe was 80 cents. I can show you again. We did it at the very beginning. Contribution margin per unit or per package, both are same, which is 80 cents. So now we're gonna plug in all these numbers. So your top part or numerator is 85,000 plus 22,000. So I'm doing the maths. And I found the numerator is 107,000. Now you're gonna divide it by 0.8. So I have my calculator. Let me do it. I divide it by 0.8, and the result I found 133,750. And that's actually in units, right? We can call it units or packages. That means the company needs to sell 133,750 packages if the company wants to earn $22,000 operating income. So this one is very straightforward. So I hope you should be fine to do this problem by yourself. You need to know this formula really well, and once you do this problem, you have another similar type of problem, which is E742B, and I hope you will do E742E and you will practice it as your homework. Thank you very much, and later I will show you a little more complicated problem soon.